what is it about the 19th century that you think is so intriguing for us now? Like we're in 2022, like why would picking up the Broadview, I mean, I know it's more than the 19th century, it's earlier too, but
Yeah.
why are these periods still speaking to us as readers?
Hmm. Gosh, there's so many reasons. I mean, I'm all about the 19th century. And I think one of the things that's always attracted me to 19th century American literature is just how queer it is.
Hi, welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I am really excited to be offering another Broadview Press themed episode. Today, I'm actually joined by Dr. Christopher Looby, who works at UCLA as a professor in the English department. I just want to mention a few of his specialties because they're really fascinating. So his interests are in American literature in the 18th and 19th centuries, sexuality studies, historical and cultural approaches to literature, print culture, formalist methods to approaching literature, and a specific excerpt in his bio really stands out to me. So hopefully we'll dig into it. But how he reads literature and the effects of reading and dynamic exchanges between bodies and pleasures of the history of sexuality, which, is right up our alley here at the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and especially with my approach to research. So without further ado, welcome, Christopher, to this episode.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for asking me to have this conversation with you and to talk about the Broadview Anthology of American Literature, which is forthcoming, I think, later
Yes.
this summer.
Yes. And I'm so excited to, go through, especially the instructor edition of the Broadview Anthology of American Literature, because I've gotten a preview copy for this interview, and there's so much that's going to be out in the summer. So there's parts that I really can't wait to see, which is, up our research alley. And I'm sure you can speak directly to this, but there's a gender and sexuality section, which looks
Mhm.
completely brand new.
Totally new. Absolutely. That was one of the things I was going to highlight for you. So I'm glad you've already seen it.
So what are some exciting updates to this revised edition of the American Literature Anthology that, readers can expect to see that you've been a part of, Christopher?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. But just to make it clear, this is not a revised edition. This is a completely new anthology.
Oh, wow.
That was, basically done from the ground up. And, one of the many things that we aimed to do in making it distinctive was to make the contents considerably more diverse than than American literature anthologies have been traditionally, but even more diverse than the newest of the new revised other American literature anthologies. And one of the ways that we wanted to highlight that was by foregrounding Native American indigenous literature and culture, by foregrounding Latinx American literature and culture. And so even though in general, the anthology is organized chronologically, as almost all anthologies are, we had a big discussion in one of our editorial meetings about this. Should we violate chronology selectively in order not to start the anthology as where most of them start, with William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation and settler colonial Puritan white American literature. So in fact, the volume A, which is beginnings to 1820, opens with a long section of indigenous oral and visual literatures. And then that's followed by a section called Civilizations in Contact, which has texts from the Caribbean, from Mexico, from Florida and New Mexico, from the Northeastern Woodlands, from New France, and from California.
Oh, wow.
Really to highlight the multilingual nature of American literature, as most of us want to think about it today, and the multicultural nature of American literature. And then there's Cabeza de Vaca, and then there's John Smith and William Bradford. They're in there, to be sure, because people want to teach them, and because they're great. But they're definitely, I don't know how to put it, not given a back seat to these other literary fields, but not given precedence. And I think that makes a pretty strong statement. So that's one thing that's distinct about it. I think also this anthology has a great deal more popular literary texts, excerpts in some cases from popular literary texts. Like there's a long excerpt from E.D.E.N. Southworth's The Hidden Hand. In that gender and sexuality section that the gender and sexuality section, which I'm really excited to see in there, there's all kinds of ephemera, really, from newspapers and magazines of the time that paint a robust picture of norms of gender and sexuality in the colonial period and in the 19th century, in the early 19th century, but also challenges to those norms. So those are a few of the ways I think that the anthology is going to stand out from the crowd. Not to diss anybody else's anthology, but this one is governed by some principles that I think will make it attractive. I hope will make it attractive to teachers who are actually trying to disrupt, the received vision of American literature as such.
Yeah, and I think, well, it's good to know now that this is a completely new Broadview anthology that's being brought out. Do you, how long of a process is it to actually bring out a completely new anthology? Like to actually, I mean, even like how many editors are there? How many conversations did you all have? Like you mentioned an editorial meeting. So yeah, that's a, very novel process for everyone listening to this.
Yeah, and I'm happy to give you as much insight as I can. The process started a few years ago. I'd have to look back through my email to remember exactly when I first got approached by Don LePan, who is the founder of Broadview Press and also its CEO, but also is the co-managing editor of the Anthology of American Literature. So he and Laura Bazard are the co-managing editors. So, and one thing I really want to share with you is that, there are, there are 12 of us who serve as general editors, and then there are 80 some other academics who are called editorial advisors, who got consulted, for one particular author or one particular text, given their expertise. So that's already a really huge team that Broadview has assembled. And it's actually Don and Laura, the co-managing editors, and others on their staff who've done the heavy lifting on really pulling together all the materials for this anthology. So a lot of the work, the vast majority of the work, is done in-house at Broadview. And then they brought in the 12 of us who are general editors to meet periodically and advise them on certain tricky questions, or look at a proposed table of contents that was way too big and make hard decisions about what was going to be dropped, and make other hard decisions. As you've probably seen, there's the print version of the Broadview Anthology of American Literature, but then there's a website that's adjunct to it. And there's a lot of material that's on the website. So that was another kind of decision that the general editors were brought in to help with, what is going to be in the print volume and what is going to be linked to it on the website, and what, we just have to sacrifice, because it's a big fat, it's 2 volumes. Volume A is the beginnings to 1820, and volume B is 1820 to Reconstruction, and there'll be a C and a D, which they're already working on.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's going to eventually go into the contemporary moment.
It will.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, was this a project that you thought when you started your academic literary career that you would be a part of an anthology eventually?
I didn't think so, to tell you the truth. And I remember when Don approached me, invited me to be one of the general editors, I had to think about it a little bit because I have only very rarely used an anthology of this kind in my teaching. And that's partly because here at UCLA, we're on the quarter system. We have 3 10-week quarters, which goes by really quickly. And before I got here, our American Literature Survey is actually has 6 legs to it. There's beginning to 1775, or there's 1775 to 1820 something, there's 1820 something to 1850 something. And so given how, finely diced our upper level American Literature Survey is, a big anthology just, it's too much to use in 10 weeks and too much to ask students to buy, since we wouldn't be using enough material from it. So I'm trying to rethink that now, because I am so enthusiastic about this. And it might be that, I could convince one of my colleagues, like let's say the colleague who's teaching the beginnings to 1775, and then I'm teaching 1775 to 1820. If we both agreed to use this anthology, that might work.
Yeah, well, and I really love, like, you're bringing this model that's specific to UCLA. I mean, how exciting that it's actually broken into those branches of American literature. I mean, to really like dig deep into each of those periods. I only had 2 American Lit surveys. I had, American Lit 1 was stopping at the Reconstruction period, and then American Lit 2 picks up into the contemporary, ends in the 21st century. But I don't remember my American Lit 2 because it was covered by my AP course. But that's a whole other, because we did a lot with a modern 20th century and then into the 21st century when I was in high school. But I do really like that, kind of breaking that up at UCLA. So shout out to your department. It's wonderful to hear that that's still thriving, because there's so many state universities or just colleges in general that literature programs have kind of just gotten rid of survey.
Yeah.
I know.
I like our version of it. I get no credit for it because it pre-existed me here, but I like it.
Yeah, and I really am a spokesperson for surveys, because I just think it's such a great model to understand all of the different trends of literature. And, I think you need that kind of starting point to then eventually dig deeper into an analysis.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Even though our survey is broken up into all those pieces, and in recent years, I've only been assigned to teach the 1865 to 1900 leg of it, which I totally love. But I always do things chronologically. I'm a big believer in chronology. I know these days there's queer temporality, and we're supposed to be mixing things up and not being so linear, but nevertheless, I think for purposes of education, it's good to take things chronologically and see what writer B makes of writer A and what writer C makes of writer B and writer A, and how they build upon one another.
Yeah, well, and I think why I always love having these anthology conversations with Broadview Press is because like an anthology is not something that just has to happen in a university, especially like this is a public humanities podcast. So some are from universities, some are the general public who just loves literature. They love going to their public library. An anthology is available at a public library. And what better way to really dig deep into a period that you're interested in? And they're accessible texts because they are not theoretical, right? Like this doesn't have different literary angles and psychoanalytic, feminist, queer. It's the text itself and close reading. And yeah, I'm so glad that this now exists from Broadview because I've loved Broadview's Victorian anthology. So, you know, they have so many like British anthologies that have come out. So it's wonderful to see now they're turning their eye towards the American massive canon.
Yeah, I know. And it's many of the same people. So one of the things that the other general editors and I are really appreciative of is that Don and Laura and their whole staff, they've done this before with the Broadview Anthology of British Literature, and they know what they're doing. They're all very scholarly. They have great expertise. And a lot of the paratextual material, like the introductions and the footnotes and so forth, they often had us review them, but they're mainly generated in-house by the staff at Broadview. And they've just done a magnificent job, I have to say. So I'm proud to be associated with it, but I feel like they are the ones who really deserve the credit for it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, so what are some, you know, who are some authors that you're just really excited or, you know, you knew that maybe you were in charge? Like, I don't know, to like speak to your own experience. Like, were you in charge more of thematically? Were you in charge with the authors that were picked? Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say I was in charge of anything, but like all the other editors, I made suggestions. Like when we saw an initial draft of the table of contents, you know, we were supposed to identify things that were missing that we would like to see in there. So, you know, I've had this other editorial project of my own going on for a while, this series called Q19, which is published by the University of Pennsylvania Press. And, you know, my experience doing that kind of queer editorial work might have had something to do with why Broadview asked me to be on this team. But for example, one of my Q19 volumes is this novel by Margaret J.M. Sweat called Ethel's Love Life from 1859, sometimes called the first American lesbian novel. I don't think that's exactly right, but anyway, it's definitely a queer novel. And so there's going to be a long chapter from Ethel's Love Life in the Broadview anthology. One of my other Q19 editions, the first one, in fact, was an anthology of queer short stories from the 19th century called The Man Who Thought Himself a Woman and Other Queer 19th Century Short Stories. And the title story from that volume, this anonymous story called The Man Who Thought Himself a Woman, is going to be in the Broadview Anthology of American Literature.
Oh, wonderful.
It's a really, really wonderful story published anonymously, but nevertheless, extraordinary story from the 1850s about a man.
That's early. Okay.
Really early.
Yeah. Because I'm always reminded of, I might not get the full title right, but is it something about the monk or I don't know. It'll come to, it's like a Quaker. It has a Quaker title.
The Quaker City?
There you go. Thank you. The Quaker City.
The Quaker City or the Monks of Monk Hall.
There we go. There is the monks. I knew monk was in it somehow, but the Quaker City, because I know it has this like very Philadelphia, brotherly love, queer kind of narrative. But I'm so glad that you've been part of Q19, which, you know, is first how I knew about you, Christopher. I have some of your Q19 texts on my bookshelf. And
good. Thank you.
No, and it's so wonderful to recover those texts that are just not in print anymore and to actually have a press behind you, like UPenn to really be eager to bring these texts out.
Yeah, I've been very grateful to them. I mean, there's been some editorial staff changes at the press, but they are still, backing this series. In fact, I have a fourth volume I'm supposed to get proofs later this week. It's a little known novel by Charles Warren Stoddard.
What is the novel called?
It's called For the Pleasure of His Company.
Oh.
And it has two subtitles, actually. For the Pleasure of His Company, An Affair of the Misty City Thrice Told, by Charles Warren Stoddard.
Oh, what year is that from?
Well, it's actually published in 1903.
Oh.
So I'm venturing a little bit out of the 19th century. But he began writing it, as far as I can tell, in the 1870s and 1880s, and worked on it for a really, really long time. And it went through a lot of revisions. But it's the only novel that Charles Warren Stoddard ever wrote or published. And it's really interesting for a million reasons. Maybe when we get to working on the Broadview Anthology of American Literature C and D,
yes.
can convince them to put an excerpt in. But it's set in San Francisco, as you might imagine. And it's about a young aspiring poet named Paul Clitheroe and his queer existence. It's both a sort of Bildungsroman, in that it's about him like trying to get a start in life and not starve. But it's also about his relationships with other men and a very queer relationship with a young woman who's another aspiring writer. And they become very intimate with one another, although they're not erotically involved with one another. But they become very good friends, and they share this ambition to write novels. So it's also a very self-reflexive novel about people writing novels, and they have interesting theoretical discussions about what a novel should be like. And his friend, who likes to be called Jack, she thinks a novel has to be more or less linear and also have a love plot. And Paul Clitheroe is appalled by that. He doesn't want his novel to be anything like that. He wants it to be about his hero's relationships with multiple people without any telos, no ending in marriage or permanent attachment or anything like that. So it's an interesting novel formally because it's in 3 parts, thrice told. And it goes over the same period of time 3 times.
Oh,
with
wow.
Paul interacting in each of the 3 books with a whole different set of friends and acquaintances. So it's like ripe for a queer temporality reading.
Yeah.
And it ends. So my volume will have this novel, but we'll also have 3 of Charles Warren Stoddard's South Sea sketches.
Okay.
Because at the end of this novel, Paul Clitheroe, he's on a yacht in the Pacific, and they're passing by Hawaii, which he's visited before, as Charles Warren Stoddard did many, many times. And so the novel just ends with him jumping ship into the kayak of some indigenous men that he was friends with before, and he just goes off.
This sounds wonderful. When is it going to come out, you think?
It's currently scheduled for March 2023.
So good, not too far. Okay, we have
it's not too far, but
less than a year.
Too far for me.
Yes. Well, definitely we'll have to keep our eyes out for that. I know I'm going to want to have that in my hands. But yeah, so I think also something in the anthology that's stands out to me is, why the 19th century was always fascinating and still fascinating to me as I, write on Whitman and queer theory. I mean, I'm a Whitman, Oscar Wilde are my main focal points, and Edith Wharton, basically Whitman and his reception. So anyone who got queer inspiration, including Edith Wharton, who I'm a Gilded Age fanatic. I love the HBO series. But I really like that there's so much to learn from the 19th century with all these changes in America, these, whether it be, race relations, social class, religious relations, immigrant communities, technological advancements with the industrialization period, right? Massive wealth that's gained, but also the other side of that coin. So, what is it about the 19th century that you think is so intriguing for us now? Like, we're in 2022. Like, why would picking up the Broadview, I mean, I know it's more than the 19th century, it's earlier too, but
Yeah.
why are these periods still speaking to us as readers?
Hmm.
Okay, hold on to that question because we'll be right back. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Gosh, there's so many reasons. I mean, I'm all about the 19th century. And I think one of the things that's always attracted me to 19th century American literature is just how queer it is.
Mm-hmm.
So as I've been working with the folks at Broadview on this anthology, I've often had in mind this quip that I don't know if you ever heard it before, but the late pioneering LGBT studies scholar Robert K. Martin.
Yes. Yes, I use his work as a touchstone.
His work is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a scholar at the University of Montreal named Eric Savoy, who also does some queer 19th century American literature. And I once heard him relate this anecdote, but now he's put it in print. He says, when he met Robert K. Martin, Eric was a graduate student at the time. He asked Robert, like, have you ever thought of editing an anthology of queer American literature? And Robert said no, because it already exists. It's called the Norton Anthology. And there's some truth to that. But nevertheless, in working on the Broadview anthology, there have been other things that we've wanted to import. So, Melville is still there and Dickinson is still there, of course, and a lot of Whitman is there.
There's a large Whitman section. I was excited to see how much is there of his poetry.
Oh, yeah.
And his prose. Yeah. And you actually have Democratic Vistas, which was exciting. But yeah, well, also for everyone listening, Robert K. Martin was iconic as a gay scholar who came out with the homosexual tradition, right?
Homosexual tradition in American poetry.
American poetry, which is like how I found his Whitman reading. And he was very experimental in his method of interpreting. And it's just so wonderful to have those texts there as that beginning of recovering queer authors, or like reading them from a gay angle. And, we wouldn't be here with our own interpretations without that. I know I wouldn't be here without those interpretations. And, your interpretations too, Christopher.
Well, thank you. But I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without Robert, because I think, I met him personally when I was in graduate school. And that was one of the many things that got me interested in queer studies. Back then it was lesbian and gay studies. But Robert, was definitely influential for steering me in this direction. It took me a while, but, I had some other things to do first.
Yeah.
But I really, I regret that he's gone. It's too bad.
Yeah. Well, I think that what I love to see in the themes that are Well, what would you call these sections? Like gender and sexuality. There's one on race. Like, do they have a certain name? These thematic, I guess maybe they're contextualizing moments
Yeah,
in these literary periods.
they do have a name. There are any number of these little sections, and they're called contexts, colon. So this one is context, gender and sexuality. And then it's a whole bunch of short excerpts, as I mentioned before, from letters, from biographies, from newspapers, from magazines, a lot of visual material as well. For instance, we've included this crazy poem called The Counter Jumper.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yes.
Yeah, it's a parody of Whitman. It's written in a sort of parodic Whitman style, but it's about, what back then was called a counter jumper, which was a dry goods clerk who was stereotypically effeminate.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like a caricature of a queer man.
Yeah, it's a
right.
caricature. Right.
Yeah, it's kind of a little indecent, but it's interesting how they parody Whitman. I remember when my Whitman scholar friend brought it to all of us to read. So I'm so glad. I love how, like you said, ephemera, and to explain that to the public, how would you explain ephemera?
Things that, came and went. Things that, some ephemera, of course, has been lost, but some of it has been retained and is out there to be rediscovered.
So like newspaper clippings and
popular illustrations.
Things that we now throw away.
Exactly.
Letters that I kind of wonder what's going to be our print left in this world. Social media, hopefully. But it'll be an interesting way that people interpret our social media interactions. So, I think as we're nearing the end of the time, I'm just, want to ask you, I never want to ask that question of who's your favorite author, because, I know when people try to ask me that, I get flustered. But, who are some authors that are included in this anthology that you're just really, you always return to, you're excited for readers to engage with?
Oh, yeah, I have many, but let me mention just a couple. So from the A volume, The Beginnings to 1820, so we're really early. Two of the things that I think I was instrumental in getting in are some excerpts from the diary of Puritan minister Michael Wigglesworth. I don't know if you've ever come across this diary before, but it was, discovered in the Massachusetts Historical Society back in the mid-20th century, and the great Puritan historian Edmund Morgan edited it and brought it out, although he carefully didn't discuss certain things about it. But in this diary, Michael Wigglesworth, he writes it when he is recently graduated from Harvard, but is now a tutor at Harvard. And he's obsessed by any number of things, but at the top of his list is he feels he has excessive affection for his students, who are, of course, all men, a few years younger than he is. And he's having nocturnal emissions. And what he calls filthy dreams and nocturnal emissions. So I got them to put some of those excerpts from Michael Wigglesworth's diary in there, because it's just, they're fascinating to read as a window into a Puritan minister's anxieties about his erotic inclinations, but also because it's really hard to figure out how much he knows about himself, because during his waking hours, he feels like he cares too much for his students. He has too much love for them. And then he has these erotic dreams and nocturnal emissions, and he doesn't seem to connect the dots explicitly. So I teach this all the time, and that's one of the things we try to figure out is, to what degree was he conscious of what was going on in his unconscious.
Hmm.
And then another thing, this is also from volume A, is a good excerpt from this book called The Female Review, which was actually authored by a man named Herman Mann, but it purports to be the autobiography of a woman named Deborah Sampson, who cross-dressed as a man in order to fight in the American Revolution. So it's kind of her memoir as told to this guy, Herman Mann. And it's a really, really fascinating book, which has gotten a little bit of attention lately in trans studies, and a little bit of debate, actually, about whether it would be appropriate or accurate to describe Deborah Sampson as trans. That's something not taking a position on.
Yeah, but it's so interesting that, I'm glad that these materials are now here. And like with that minister that you brought up, what year is or time was he writing these diaries?
Yeah, this is very, very early. It's in the 1650s.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, mid 17th century. So
yeah, very early, even before the Salem witch trials in 1692. Is there anything about the witch trials?
Oh, there must be.
No.
I'd have to page through the.
Yeah, I'll have to look through the table of contents again, because I know definitely Benjamin Franklin has to be in volume A somehow.
Oh yeah, Benjamin Franklin is there.
But I wonder if a lot of his parody pieces that he wrote for newspapers, there's so many witty entries he writes when he's doing his almanac.
Yeah. No, there definitely is some of that in there.
Oh, good. But like you're saying, there's, you don't have to find the exact one, Christopher, but what you're saying is there's so much taste of every, decade and, type of identity. And I think that's so important because I was browsing through. So it's wonderful to see that there's so many slave narratives, but, it's not just the slave narratives. Like you said, there's indigenous literature. To read people of color, you don't have to only read a slave narrative. There is so much more. There's Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who I love as a poet. And I know that there's a large section dedicated to her.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just so excited for everyone to actually get their hands on this. So I think what is the easiest way, for people to actually purchase this brand new anthology of American literature from Broadview?
Oh, I think there are so many different ways. I mean, I haven't looked at Amazon to see if it's available there yet, but you could certainly buy it directly from Broadview by going to their website or pre-order a copy of it, since it's not quite in print yet, but it will be soon.
Almost. And I can't wait because I haven't gotten my print copy yet. Do you have a print copy with you, Christopher?
No, I don't. I don't think
okay. It's a secret.
I have access to a digital copy of it. But
I want to see the cover. Do you know what the cover is?
I do. That's another thing that the general editors looked at very, very carefully, because we wanted some of the possible covers that they showed to us seemed to us to have political implications that would be a little at odds with the purposes of the anthology. So there's a famous painting, I forget who it's by, of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. And I think there's maybe a slave or a Native American in the background. And we all just thought, no, we don't want the cover to be a famous white man with figures of other races subordinated.
Yeah, I would say the founding fathers would be difficult to have on the front cover in this current moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting. So anyway, the covers as they stand are textiles.
Oh,
so I think one of them is a pattern from an old quilt.
Oh, wow.
And another one I think is a beaded bag of some kind, a Native American beaded accessory.
So it's like more of so it seems like, I love that the cover went more for texture and for the aesthetic style of color, and yeah, like the patchwork quilt of identity in a way.
Yeah.
Is
I
more
like
is more the analysis than like an actual physical representation of someone we know from history. I think I love that they went with that. Well, I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see these covers. Yes. Christopher wants to have we want to have it in our hands. But
for sure.
And I think what's wonderful is, like, Christopher had mentioned, there's so much beyond just the print. So like if you get the ebook, there's so many texts that they can't include in the print edition, just because, it can be over 1,000 pages, but it's not going to go to like 3,000 pages.
Yeah.
So there's so much online. There's an instructor's edition that I had the opportunity to look at that has so many ways to approach your teaching. But like I'm saying, if you're listening and you're not, an instructor, or, you don't think you're going to be, like, you're a student who wants to get this text to like brush up on your American literature knowledge, the general public, you're all going to learn so much. And if you're a fan and you want to learn more about, especially the colonial period of America, indigenous literature, which we don't have a lot of texts of in print right now. This is a text for you. This is for those literature lovers who just need, something to rely on in your bookshelf. So, it's been wonderful talking with you, Christopher. I, am just such a fan of getting to have this opportunity to hear directly from what it's like for you to be an editor in this experience of the anthology. I was going to say hysteria, but in the anthology excitement. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your excitement. I really appreciate it. I think it's a real achievement, both for the editors, for the staff, for everybody who consulted on it, and gave advice and wrote some of the introductory matter. It really is a kind of collective product of a collective, which is lovely.
And it's wonderful to see texts that are a collaboration. When you're not in isolation by yourself, which is how most people think of writing. But there are collaborative projects like an anthology. So, hopefully there'll be more of these collaborative. I think it's nice to have a group of people together.
I agree.
Yeah. So, everyone out there, get your hands on Broadview Press's. Oh, that's what I wanted to mention. You get 20% off with our code Ivory Tower. So use Ivory Tower in the promo code when you buy the Broadview Press American Literature Anthology. Thank you so much, Christopher, for joining. And we're going to say bye to the audience out there. They have a lot to research now. They have a lot to look up on Google. Many books. Okay. Bye to everyone out there. Thank you so much for listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, or True Crime in Academia. I'm Andrew Rimby, the executive director. Our team includes Mary DePippi, our chief contributor, Nicole Arguello, our marketing assistant, and Kimberly Dallas, our editor. Ivory Tower Boiler Room episodes come out on Monday, and sometimes I'm joined by a guest co-host. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and on Twitter at Ivory Boiler Room. And here's Mary.
Hello, everyone. I am the host of True Crime in Academia. Do not forget to follow True Crime in Academia on Instagram and TikTok at True Crime in Academia. And coming soon, there will be a Twitter also at True Crime in Academia. Now, if you're like me, you like to have bonus episodes. I love extra content, don't you? So go to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Not only do you have access to our video interviews, but you will also be able to access never before seen bonus episodes. So like I said, we don't release them anywhere else. You can only get those on Patreon. So go to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room and become a subscriber today. And don't forget to listen to Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Mondays and True Crime and Academia on Tuesdays.